All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and start off class today. I'm going to show you some pictures talking about different artists. Okay, so you should have your note takers out, and you'll notice in the note taker a series of yellow highlights with questions for this week's notes. You're supposed to actually answer those questions in the space provided. So let's start off with this first slide. This is Beyonce, aka Sasha Fierce, aka Queen Bee. Beyonce is easily one of the most powerful Black woman artists today. She's started her career with a group called Destiny's Child, and then eventually sort of started doing her own thing. And as far as like the context of ethnic studies, there are a couple of songs where she's really kind of trying to address the conditions that her community deals with in this country. And then more recently with COVID-19, she's been trying to highlight exactly how this epidemic or pandemic has been impacting her community. But also, I would just say that her presence in pop culture and sort of the influence that she's had to be able to sort of um, make sure that, that her community is visible in this narrative, I think is pretty powerful. Next up, we have Bob Marley, who's probably most known for popularizing reggae music and really bringing it to the United States in a way that caught mainstream attention. There are obviously reggae artists prior to that whose music had made its way from Jamaica here to the United States and definitely to the UK. But there was something about Bob Marley and his career and his songwriting that really captured the attention of particularly American audiences. His songs like Get Up, Stand Up, or Buffalo Soldier really highlighted the sort of conditions and struggles of Africans all over the world. Definitely in line with many of the things that we talk about here in ethnic studies. Next up, you have Soledad Brava, who was making music since, I want to say, the late 50s or mid 50s, 60s, and on. I mean, she was doing her career for a very long time, many decades. And she was a part of the Nueva Canción movement in Latin America, particularly at a time when there were a lot of these military dictatorships popping up, really repressive dictatorships popping up in different countries throughout Latin America. And this was a time when the United States was supporting these kinds of dictatorships, saying that, they needed these sorts of folks there who were pretty violent and ruled with almost, they were essentially dictators in their countries. But the United States supported them because they supposedly were trying to fight communism. It just happened to be also that these dictators were also very friendly to American businesses and corporations. And so Soledad Bravo was writing songs about the conditions that her people were experiencing as a result of all this. She was talking about different civil wars and rebellions and revolutions that were happening. This is Nina Simone. I would argue that Beyonce is like the Nina Simone of 2020. I don't know. I mean, that's probably a little bit of a stretch, but Nina Simone was as popular as Beyonce was for her day, and she captured the attention of audiences, and definitely across Europe, but also here in the United States. And she wrote about the conditions and sang about the conditions that Black folks were experiencing in America, particularly in the American South. She was a civil rights activist, and one of her most famous songs is called Strange Fruit. And she talked about the strange fruit that would hang from southern trees. And the metaphor essentially was that the strange fruit that she was talking about were Black bodies that were the targets of the Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacists in the South, right? And it was a way to sort of highlight the conditions through music and popularize it so that people who otherwise wouldn't be paying attention to what was happening to Black folks in the South were aware. And then finally, to bring it a little bit back more into sort of the modern era, this is one of my favorite bands called the Mars Volta, started by here the guitarist Omar Rodriguez Lopez and Cedric Zavala. The drummer here is John Theodore. The band is comprised of all folks of color. I actually think they had, yeah, no, I think that's true. But they represent more of this sort of young punk rock influence of sort of young people kind of like lashing out at the experience that they were having. Both Omar and Cedric grew up in El Paso, Texas, which is a border town, and they experienced a lot of sort of racism and classism in their day, and took a lot of that energy out through music. So the reason kind of starting off by looking at these artists is because this week our focus is going to still be around YPAR, but we're going to shift and focus focus on this idea of music as a tool for resilience and resistance. We're going to define these two terms today, and then really explore different examples of music and musicians who really push this envelope of being resilient and resistant.